for sure, right? And that probably will be backloaded, meaning a lot of the real work will happen later on in the session. There won't be the usual multitude of bills and public hearings, et cetera. So our work has been delayed in the same way that everyone else's work has been delayed. And but at the end of the day, I think we'll have a pretty complete set of recommendations for the General Assembly to consider. So at our last gathering, or maybe it was 2 gatherings ago, I'm not sure, we talked about one of the things that I had sent along some draft language regarding, and I think we did kick that around quite a bit, and I think we came up with a pretty diplomatic suggestion related to the actual facility, the Whiting Forensic Hospital facility. And in that discussion and in that draft recommendation, it's our intent, I believe, to make it clear that the process for replacing that facility should begin now, right? We understand that the start to finish timeline for this kind of a project is 4 or 5 years. We've got that, but the sooner we start, the sooner it'll be completed. And I think the rationale for that is the facility itself, and we visited it. You know, I've been there multiple times. I know Laura, you work there. Everyone agrees, the patients, the staff, the family members, that the facility is just completely inappropriate for the medical purpose it's intended to serve, right? It's you know, I've been in all the prisons and jails in our state. The Whiting Forensic, the building, is beneath the standard of even the oldest, most out-of-date correctional facility we have up and running today. So that's very, very important. And our language is geared to incentivizing the General Assembly, the administration, to begin contemplating the process of replacing that building, starting with, you know, hiring professionals to scope out not just the way the building should be constructed, but the purpose for which it is intended, right? So how many patients do we really foresee will need that kind of will need any kind of a maximum security type setting? Plus, I think we've all agreed that there are many patients who are being treated either at Whiting or at Dutcher who don't require the maximum security type facility that Whiting itself is intended to be, and to find a way to accommodate that, because I think we've come to some consensus around the idea that, you know, if you're trying to provide medical treatment and services to patients in a facility like the Whiting building, predictably the outcomes will be suboptimal. Let's just put it that way. And so that's our recommendation, to get that ball rolling. And the details, of course, will be addressed by the General Assembly and the governor and his staff. But it's something that should not be overlooked in 2021.
Any comments? Did people, I have here a National Association of State Mental Health Program Directors document, which is the forensic patients in state psychiatric hospitals from 1999 to 2016. It was published in 2017. Have folks seen that? Because it is a very good document about what are the trends and where does Connecticut stand?
Could you share that?
Okay, I will definitely get it too, because I find it does give us some idea of what's going on in the rest of the world. But I know we've already asked OLR for some to answer some questions so that we can make better sense of what's going on, and the trends. So I will get this document to you. I found it interesting because it does answer, it does put us on ranked among the other states in the union. Does anybody else have anything more to say about Mike's proposition? I think we're all pretty much on this same page with this.
Yeah,
I think so. I was, good.
I'm sorry, Laurie. I would just a small editorial comment to remind our team here that it's the Whiting Forensic Hospital. And Mike was talking about visiting all the prisons in the state and saying it didn't even hold to that standard. And having, I think, visited all the hospitals in the state, I certainly could attest that it doesn't meet the standard by any hospital, which is actually part of the whole question that I think everyone struggles with. Is it a hospital? Is it a prison? And there's plenty of ways to make secure facilities within hospitals. We all have done it. And I think it's a fundamental issue, actually. So just editorialize that a little bit. That it certainly doesn't meet any hospital standard.
I think that's an important differentiation. One of the things that came to mind as I was reviewing the documents and last week's meeting, we are evolving a sense of principles, guidance that we would like to reflect. I mean, each one of us has, and Dr. Rodas just mentioned, you know, the atmosphere, and are we talking about a hospital or are we talking about a prison? So as we move forward to the finality of this report, I think I myself have started writing down some of what I consider to be some of the basic premises of what we would like to see at the end of this. We've said it, we've been over it several times, but I was reading the law that was proposed for the PSRB, and the idea of balancing the safety of the public with the rights of the patient. This is something that is one of our, I sense it's one of our basic premises. And as we talk about doing a master facilities plan, those kinds of important senses that we would like to portray should also be a guidance to the people that are making or are doing that plan. You mentioned many times therapeutic, a recovery model, these kinds of things. I think most of us agree on. We just should also consider putting that in as kind of where we want to see this all to go. But not today, just to think about that. And maybe in the military, we have something they call do-outs. Anybody heard that one? So the do-out for the next meeting should be that we all, within our own selves, evolve that sense of what is our basic premise of where we would like to see this go. A do-out. And hopefully have it for the next meeting. Okay, so any more, Mike? Oh, you want to say something, Dr. Hauser?
Yeah, I was just curious where we landed with the revision that I sent around to what Mike had sent around. I remember I added a bullet or so at the end.
Yes, I remember that.
Just to flesh out some of the things we talked about last time about the flexibility, the need to change with the times or be able to change with the times, the idea of trying to create or modify or transform the existing structure. So I was curious. I know some people had responded via email, but I just wasn't sure where we had landed with that modification.
Well, do you want to say, I think it was good. Does anybody have any problems with that? So as we go forward, I'm actually looking at what you wrote, and I'm thinking maybe that's the beginning of where we set forth our basic beliefs about this program and where it should go in what you've put together. So Dr. Rodas, can you talk about your piece of the pie?
Well, I think just to recap, I guess, some of the comments we all made after the facilities, and you touched on one already, the PSRB and the new proposed, well, it's not new anymore, proposed legislation to consider changing that. It was certainly something we spent a lot of time on. I think the backlog of getting residents as they move towards incorporation and matriculation into the community, that's a significant issue that we've spent a lot of time on as well, the lack of available sites for folks as they get into the community, and that creates then the backlog, which creates then the space issues. And et cetera. We did talk about the training, spent a lot of time talking about training of the staff on multiple areas, including, de-escalation, including diversity and inclusion, and vis-a-vis as, just again, to remember how we got started here was there has to be a process that's fair, but also quick of an escalation if there's any issues, any potential issues coming up vis-a-vis abuse of the patients. There has to be a process by which that's escalated quickly and adjudicated appropriately, and not languishing or get buried somewhere and mired in paperwork. So I think those are and I think the last comment I would make, and vis-a-vis management, I think, as a hospital president, I have to admit, it's a little awkward. I thought the relationship with Yale, I don't have any problems with Yale per se, but to outsource, if you will, the entire management, it just seemed a little odd to me. It seemed like, and I think Lori had mentioned that as well, that I think our preference would be that there's a state employee that runs the facility, and if you need to contract with Yale for the psychiatric services, understood, but preferably actually you'd have employees who are both the management and providing the professional services. That's it.
Does anybody have any comments on Dr. Rodis's? I also agree with the difference. I know that in the past, as I mentioned, when state agencies, mine in particular, we had several agreements with different universities, and we had a contract with St. Francis. I don't think you were there then because it was a long time ago, but we paid for what we got. And that going forward, the idea that there's a need for accountability. And also, I know that we brought this up before, and I know that there was some concerns about this, but I do feel, as I mentioned in my recommendations, that you have to have someone from the outside being responsible for looking at what is going on in the inside. And some of these things, for example, I can't imagine as some of the things that we heard from the patients, broken glass, vermin, all of this stuff, that could not happen in a hospital in Connecticut, except maybe there. You would be written up and you would be closed down till that was finished. So I am still very strong on the idea of licensure and accreditation from outside sources, so that is it is a tool which can help for the administration and have patient rights be right there at the top of the list. So that is one of the things that I really feel strongly about. Any other thoughts on that?
I'm sorry. Do you mind if I comment?
Sure, go ahead.
I think perhaps the committee is perhaps misremembering. Lighting is actually licensed by the Department of Public Health as a hospital. So I just wanted to clarify that information.
Right.
Okay.
But when did that happen, Mary Kate? That was just recently, wasn't it? When it was it always that way? When it was under?
It's actually been several years now.
So when they severed the relationship with CVH and they made it a separate entity.
Correct.
Okay.
It's one of the documents that we have on the website.
It's actually in law too. So just to clarify, it's in statute.
Okay, so listen,
all right. Thank you.
Let me ask you another
thing,
thing, Mary Kate. Is CVH licensed?
There's like a road.
CVH is not licensed.
And that's where some of the patients were talking about the worst kind of conditions. I mean, as I can say, the Connecticut Department of Public Health, if everybody remembers how bad it was at Rocky Hill, it wasn't until they brought them in that change was really made, and it has been a help to get the Medicare, Medicaid reimbursement and so forth. So I thank you for that.
Thank you. And just let me clarify that DPH does come in as an agent of CMHC,
CMS.
Medicare and Medicaid. Yes, CMS. So if there are complaints that they are looking at, they would be able to identify things like you've discussed, such as vermin, et cetera.
Well, that's a Medicare, Medicaid thing. And is CVH still getting Medicaid money?
Yes.
Wasn't it not too long ago, though? You had to call in the Department of Public Health, right? To bring it up to standards so they could requalify for the Medicaid?
No, I believe they came in, and I'll have to refer back to my colleagues at CVH. We never lost Medicaid.
Maybe 3 or 4 years ago? I would like to hear back on that because it was my understanding that they lost their CMS.
That's why the hospitals split, so that they wouldn't lose the CMS. It's been put in jeopardy before, but it was never actually severed. It wasn't terminated for CVH. But one of the things that we have on our list, under, I think we'll get to it, under the charges of evaluate the feasibility of creating an independent standalone inspector general, that one, we talked about, or I think a couple of us put in recommendations about removing that exemption from all other state hospitals. Right now, Whiting's the only one that is subject to DPH licensure. So we talked about removing that exemption from all the other hospitals, because the reason why they should be.
Okay, thank you. Do you have anything else, Dr. Rodas? Okay, Nancy, you had some comments too on this. We can't hear you.
I only had a very brief comment to what John wrote, which was just that any of the Yale personnel be held to the same standards of accountability as state employees. And I don't know how that would work with the union, et cetera. And it may be a non-starter if we're talking about the only Yale people being contracted psychiatrists and that all of the other management people moved out. So I think it's an important point in concept, but if things get structured the way we're thinking about it, it might not be that critical. In terms of what Lori put together, I thought that she captured our conversations very well. And so I didn't have anything to add to that. But what I would like to say, and when we're talking about amending the PSRB, I mean, the point that I've raised aside from the amending the PSRB is to consider recommendations to just abolish the whole damn thing, because we're the only place, I think, except for maybe 2 other states that have something of this nature. And you know, it is broke, so why fix it? I'm not sure it's fixable. So I think we shouldn't immediately jump to the amendments that had been proposed. We can live with the amendments that we've proposed, but we'll still have a broken system. And then the other thing that I would like to say that I think we need to get to, and it's on the list of recommendations that were put together, and I don't remember exactly where it is, but it's in terms of the Patient's Bill of Rights, and making sure that all of the various components of the Patient's Bill of Rights apply to the patients at Whiting as well. And specifically, we're talking about, it's in the 4th bullet. And there's going to be some discussion about this because we don't all agree on this. But
Could you help me and tell me what bullet we're talking about?
It's the second. Well, it is the 4th point. It's that whole 4th point that we all just said that there's some that's what encompasses the 4th point. And the recommendation that Paul, Kim, and I put forward was that the Whiting exception to the part of the patient's Bill of Rights that excludes the right of patients at Whiting to be present when their belongings are searched, that be removed. And I think, Linda, you would agree with that.
Yes, I did.
And Lori is the only one who, at least in a response to this document, has said she doesn't agree with that. So I think we might need to have some discussion on that, because we're discussing all the stuff that we've done a really good job on formalizing, the stuff that Mike wrote up, the stuff that Lori wrote up, the stuff that John wrote up. And maybe we should move to this, which is going to require some discussion because we don't all feel the same way about it.
Okay, can we just finish then with, if you're finished, then have Lori finish and then come back to this? Does that work for everybody? Okay. All right. Are you, Nancy? Well, she will. I don't know what game she's watching. What game were you watching back there?
Oh, I don't know. It's my husband's screen. It's just a green screen.
Well, what stadium is that?
Oh, it's Yankee Stadium.
Yankee Stadium, come on.
Yeah, I kind of
Really?
figured that out.
Yeah. No, that's fine.
Okay.
I just have to get up and do something for 1 sec.
All right, Lori, do you want to talk about what your contributions were? And thank you for doing that.
You're muted, Lori.
You're muted, Lori.
All right. We talked about several of them already last time from the first, I guess, major bracket about the facility. So we just now talked about the removing other hospitals from the exemption about licensure. I think we'll have to swing back to this discussion about the patient searches. The other, and I do have some comments about some of the PSRB stuff, which maybe we can come back to. But the other things I had on here were just had to do with the Whiting Advisory Board and its components. I just recommended that somebody on the Whiting Advisory Board be required to have forensic experience. I think presently some of the individuals on it do, but that's, I think, just by happenstance. I think it should be a requirement that somebody have actual forensic experience on that committee. And then some of the other things that are, I think one of these was my recommendations, and then there was some others that Nancy put forth, or another Nancy put forth, that had to do with accountability and reporting data and making data available publicly to hold people account. So some of that had to do with the things that I had written about, that the administration should be required to report data around vacancies and plans to rectify that, any sort of training needs and how they're going about addressing those. And then when it comes to investigations of staff, to report data on things like how timely those investigations are, the sanctions or punitive results, broken down by race or ethnicity, gender, class, meaning job class, so that there's more transparency and more accountability around how people are getting dealt with, and who's getting dealt with in what way, to see if there's some discrepancies, because that was one of the things I think Mike's brought it up several times, that some people had approached him about, in particular, about some of the disparities that go along with sanctions and treatment at the hospital. And the things that Nancy had brought up about reporting data on, I agree with as well, or I would support any sort of data being reported around with respect to treatment, racial, ethnic, I forget what where the points were that she made, but it had to do with different types of treatment, particularly involuntary treatments. So folks that get involuntary medications, or ECT or restraint seclusion, having those that data reported by race or ethnicity or gender, or forget what other things she mentioned. Nancy, do you know where I'm at with that?
Yeah,
You know, what
I do. It's right above bullet point 4, so it's still part of bullet point 3, and it's the second one.
oh, yes, yeah,
from the top of that
recommend,
page.
yeah,
So recommend that the state require reporting of racial, ethnic, and language data regarding the use of forced psychiatric treatment, civil commitment, forced medication, forced electroshock, restraint, and seclusion. Facilities should be required to report this data.
so, and I think that kind of stuff is good in, again, kind of providing that transparency, that accountability. It also provides an opportunity to do research. Myself and a couple colleagues at the hospital recently did some research on the use of restraint during transport of patients, like to medical appointments and things like that, and are trying to look at the some of the impact of race on that. So it's something that we have kind of going forward to investigate that a little bit more. But I think that looking at those kinds of things will help us to understand if there are biases and try to account for that and try to fix those things. So I guess there's a question of, you know, to whom this data would be reported, or it could be something that's, you know, I don't know if it could be, you know, if it be to the Whiting Advisory Board, to some other committee or some other entity, but I do think reporting of that stuff is a good thing.
Can I just comment on that briefly?
Sure.
So, and I think I mentioned this a couple of times in the past, but in my mind, you know, I'm trying to deal with this whole idea of an inspector general, and I think we kind of agree that the Whiting Advisory Board needs to get beefed up a fair amount. And I actually think it's possible to combine the two, right? I think if you had a Whiting Advisory Board that in effect is going to act similar to these civilian review boards that have been established now to do oversight of, you know, police misconduct and things like that. I think it's possible if we were to recommend, whether you call it an inspector general or not, so a staff person or two for the Whiting Advisory Board, and have this data that we're discussing now reported to them, and give them the ability to make recommendations or act in a way similar to these oversight entities that are being established in criminal justice world. I think that might get the trick done. So I just want to throw that out there, because I think we've got the ability to create an entity, a sort of independent entity that will be able to address these concerns as they emerge. So I just want to put that out there for context.
Okay, Paul?
I'm kind of conflicted on that, Mike, and I'm not really sure, because I think that there's a component of my thought that tends to think that there needs to be something outside of the system to look at the system. I think that unless the advisory committee is going to have like full board responsibilities for Whiting, and the full power that comes with being a board,
That's what I am talking about, just to be clear.
Yeah, no. I know, and I'm just kind of riffing off that a bit. You know, so I think we really should look at that as to what we're actually recommending for the advisory committee, because right now they aren't strong at all.
Right.
They pretty much said we show up to the dog and pony show each month, or whenever we meet, and we get this report that may or may not have anything to do with Whiting. We don't get information, and so how do we strengthen them to have that oversight? But I think insofar as employee administration relationships, and even patients' reports of abuse and all that, I would much rather prefer that be handled on the outside.
Do you have anything else, Paul? Because I agree with you. And I think that's, if you want to proceed, or can I just jump in?
Oh, Jesus.
Okay. I personally know that I was terribly disappointed to hear the report of that task force. And although it could be a vehicle for some of the things we wish to accomplish, it certainly has to have a different form of reporting. And my experience, and I go back and I want you to know, I don't think that the Department of Veterans Affairs is the end all or be all, but we were required to report to the Committee of Jurisdiction once a year, the advisory committee, about what was going on. And so that you can have all these reports, but it's not going anywhere. And that has probably been one of the most just difficult parts of all of this. Whose responsibility? So the point being here is that if you engage going forward, we need to engage the interest of the, not just because things are going bad, but the interest of everybody has to be in there. The governor, if he appoints those people to the task force, then he should require some sort of communication with them about what's going on. Another part of that is the task force the commissioner does not decide what the task force does. That should not be there. And I got that feeling that it was, that she decided they would have to go and get a Freedom of Information Act to get the information about write-ups, that's something that happened and something they bear some legitimate responsibility for. So that's a very important part that you brought up, Paul. If we're going to use them, and I think it's a good vehicle, we have to punch it up a bit and give them both what they can do and what they can't. I see you, Nancy. Go ahead. Can't hear you.
There we go. And one constituent group that needs to be a part of this that's critical is people with lived experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about having staff, and we're talking about that, without people with lived experience on any kind of a committee like that, it's really worthless. So whatever gets put together, I could only support if it included people with lived experience. Now, if it's a group that's outside of the hospital, of the facility, my guess is it would have to be people with historical lived experience. But if we're going to have something inside the facility, there's absolutely no reason why there can't be people who are currently living there. So that's.
Yes, Dr. Hauser. Good point, Nancy.
I think I'm forgetting who is actually on the Whiting Advisory Board. Are there currently people from within the hospital?
No, I don't believe there
I
are.
think
within the
so.
hospital.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I guess I'm asking, I'm curious, Paul, like when you say you prefer something to be outside the hospital, like how much more outside? Like if nobody there is working at the hospital.
But we're talking about two separate things here. I'm talking about the advisory board that's a part of the hospital that has more board function than advisory function for Whiting. But insofar as investigations into staff and misconduct and stuff like that, I think that needs to be outside of the hospital. I think that I still have this replay of Dr. Hauser testifying, not Dr. Hauser, Dr. Wasser testifying before us one of the many times that he was in, saying basically, the thing you need to understand is they're challenged as to why they couldn't be believed when they bring up abuse. And so I think that someone outside of that needs to come in, someone with strong investigative skills needs to come in. And even with employee misconduct and looking into that so that it can be resolved quickly. I think that the internal processes in place have not worked. And I have yet to hear anything about these processes being changed and how they're going to be changed so that they can work. That gives me the confidence that people are going to be protected. Because again, basically we were brought together because someone was systematically abused for long periods of time. And the system totally failed this person. And so how are we as a task force assuring that people are going to be safe going forward and that this won't happen again? Because, you know, again, buildings are nice, but, you know, 5 to 10 years from now, there's going to be another task force looking into abuse at another hospital. And it's like, so how are we really affecting the change of why we were first brought together?
I thank you, Paul. I really think we have to think out of the box. Now, Dr. Rodas, I know you've had experiences with boards, hospital boards. Does if Whiting is the hospital, right? Do they have a board of trustees?
Yeah, of course, we had a board, but I think, so I think Paul's point of separating these two issues, right? One is a governing board is indeed does governance, right? Not management. But I think Paul's talking about, and Paul, I don't want to speak for you, but I think we're talking about the process by which any allegations, and it kind of alludes to what I was talking about earlier, you have to have a process by which events, occurrences get investigated and moved up to somewhere. And the question is, who is that? And is a question of, can the fox watch the hen house, you know, effectively? Now, I would argue, on the one hand, if you have the right culture, you could do it with an effective management structure, and the board at the end of the day would be in a capacity to hear the issues, and which they should be accountable to hear any of the issues and how they're being resolved. I think Paul's point is that perhaps based on history, we can't count on, in this case, the oversight of those particular types of incidents being handled internally, and that perhaps there needs to be some extrinsic, and I don't think it's actually the board per se, to be honest, because they wouldn't be the type of people he was talking about, you know, trained kind of people, trained in investigation. Now, those people could report to the board to that point, so it takes away from management. But it's sort of getting a little more complex and granular now. But I don't, you know, I don't philosophically disagree that much with Paul. If you can't really fundamentally change the culture of the organization on the short term, which you probably can't, then perhaps you have to have a vehicle where these allegations and claims are investigated externally. Is that, Paul, am I
right, but
accurately articulating your concerns?
Yeah, exactly, Dr. Rodas. Thank you. I mean, because I think that, you know, we're looking at a culture that's been ingrained over decades, and you know, I don't think that there's any one person who can come in and make all the changes necessary, and I don't think that we should be worrying about, oh my God, do we have the right person in there at all the time? You know, it's kind of like, how can we set up a structure that takes care of itself, as opposed to, well, we have to have the right people and they have to build the right culture and they have to do this. It's going to take time to build that culture. You know, we can make changes, but one of the things that I keep noticing about the mental health system is we go and make these changes, but there's this gravitational pull back to this old medical, let's, you know, keep people out of sight, out of mind, and somehow they're less than human, and, you know, and that concerns me. It really does. And I think that there are ways that we can give people that hope that if they have a complaint, that it will be investigated fully, that they won't be dismissed because they've been diagnosed, or that they're on a low rung of the employment ladder, or, you know, something like that, something that's going to be fair and equitable to people. I just don't trust the current system to do that. And I think that process would take longer than building the new facility.
we have a rare opportunity. All of us have a rare opportunity to rewrite this trajectory. Boards can be made up of people with special interests. They can be made up of all kinds of responsibilities. And as we move forward, we should consider that. You know, for example, as I mentioned, the task force that you have now literally is something with no teeth. It just meets, but going forward, we should think about what kinds of responsibilities would we like to assign this task force, and how can that happen? We don't have to flesh out, just like we don't have to decide how much money and all this stuff. What you just said, Paul, that is very salient. This is what we want that body to be able to do, so that we don't have to bring in, that this body is responsive to the mission, that it is a place where some of these things could have been reported years ago and would have been changed. But going forward, I just remember that in the beginning days of my nursing, we spent time in a state hospital with patients, and it's a lot different now, but we are on the cusp of many other changes that can actually capitalize on some of the things that we're doing now. I think that you have, as we go forward, Paul, could people think about what do they want this committee to be? They could be the deans of places. They could be people who have the lived experience. They could people who are advocates. They could all be in this group, and that what would the task force mission be? To be that leavening agent, to be that place where discussions can take place, where complaints can be reviewed. But ultimately, where do all of their deliberations go? If they are appointed by the governor, that's where it goes, to the General Assembly, so that it's not happening behind closed doors. They have the opportunity. They are a vehicle, a wherewithal to get this message out so that action can be taken before patients suffer. Just something to think about. Yes, Laurie.
So I think as we put all that in our heads to think about how we want to move forward, I think we also need to remember that, like, we have to think about, like, and be more specific, I think, about what we would recommend. It's one thing to say something needs to be better, but to specifically articulate, okay, what do we think that external oversight would look like? Is it somebody from this board, or is it somebody else? Because things are different today than they were 4 years ago. There were no camera reviews. There were cameras in the building. There were no camera reviews 4 years ago. And that's a big problem. And that's very different today. There's more cameras, they're higher quality, they're reviewed multiple times a day, every incident. There's data that the management gathers on that. Incident reports are written if somebody alleges abuse. The legislature itself made it a misdemeanor to fail to report. So there are some things that have changed. They brought in an external monitoring agency immediately to also review the cameras. So there's a lot of things that were put in place. So we need to think about, okay, where do we need to go from today? Not where do we need to go from 4 years ago when this happened, but where do we need to go from today? Or where do we want them to go from today? With all those things that are in place, what do we think needs to happen beyond that to make sure that, as Paul said, that we're not sitting here 5 or 10 years from now? So that's a piece that I'm trying to put through, to attach to this conversation is we can't be thinking about where we were 4 years ago. We should be thinking about what it is today.
Right. And I would even say that while there's been change in the appearance of change, I don't trust it. I don't think it's taken root yet. I think that I think they're heading in a decent direction, but I think we need to solidify more what these changes are and how we as a task force can recommend these changes going forward, so that it does become a part of the culture, so that it does become ingrained. It's kind of funny because I know Demas adopted the recovery movement in 2002, if not before, when Arthur Evans was a deputy commissioner, and recovery hasn't taken root. It becomes a veneer on traditional services. And so I want to make sure that the changes that are being implemented just aren't a veneer. And I think a lot of people, institutional trust was broken here. We know that there was a letter, well over 10 years ago now, in Bill Shahadi's file saying that he was being abused. And 10 years later, plus, it finally comes out, oh yeah, guess what? He was abused. And so how, I think that I just don't trust these changes. To me, they just feel like a veneer right now. And I think we really need to take a look at that of what is real change and what is just.
So
You're off, Pa. Are you still talking?
Well, what is real change and what is something that's going to stay around? Basically, I saw Nancy and Lori with their hands
Yeah,
up. So
I'm going to ask Nancy first and then Lori.
I mean, and I think one of the things that concerns me is, culture change, and we keep using the word change, but we're really talking about culture change. And it's not the kind of change that can be mandated by statutes. It's not the kind of change that can be mandated by new administrative directive. It's a real culture change. And one of the things that makes it particularly difficult to do, I think, and this is coming from someone who was a very staunch unionist. I've been president of the union when I've been in a union shop, and so I say this with, it's difficult for me to get this out, but I think that's one of the stumbling blocks that we have, is having a culture change within the union. There are so many expectations of state employees, and again, I'm someone who was a state employee for almost 20 years, but there's a lot of expectation about job permanency. There's a lot of expectations about what they can and can't do, and it's, as we know, based upon what has happened, it can be very, very difficult to try to get culture change in a union shop. I'm not sure that that's something that we can do. It might come if there is more buy-in with an advisory group, because right now there is absolutely no buy-in, and I would respectfully suggest that getting an advisory group appointed by the governor is the wrong way to go. The governor really does, no matter who the governor is, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, but I worked under the auspices of a advisory committee appointed by the governor for the Office of Protection and Advocacy for many, many years. And the mere fact that this advisory committee was appointed by the governor was one of the reasons that OPA almost lost its funding and why OPA was abolished, because it has to come from the people who have a stake, from the stakeholders. And to be honest, when you get that high up, or even when you get into the legislature, you're really not talking about the stakeholders. But the stakeholders are the unions. The stakeholders are the disability organizations like Paul's and like mine. The stakeholders are the only ones who are going to have the kind of buy-in that I think is necessary for there to be the kind of culture change that we're talking about. And I'm not sure that our little report is going to be able to institute that kind of culture change. We can make the recommendations, but as you know, Paul's saying, we have to do more than window dressing, and it's something that's going to take a really long time. We can take care of some of the external stuff, some of the stuff that is in black and white that needs change, like the PSRB, like the Patient's Bill of Rights, like the facility. I mean, we can do that, but it's a different story, I think, to think that we're going to be able to provide the kind of environment that's going to result in the culture change that's necessary. Hopefully, maybe some of these other things will result eventually in culture change. I hate to be so pessimistic, but
I'd like to ask Mike. You've had a lot of experience at the Capitol, and you've also had a lot of experience with governors. Would you care to give us some thoughts about the idea of an advisory committee of a state facility having advisors report to the governor or the legislature?
Sorry. Yes, happy to do that. So a couple of things. First of all, and I did mention this a few minutes ago, over the past year or so, there's been a lot of these independent oversight entities created it's usually in the context of criminal justice reform, right? These civilian oversight commissions, that type of thing. For example, the legislature just reconstituted the police officer standards and training post, right? And they have authority, enhanced authority under that law to set policy and standards, but also to decertify police officers. In other words, revoke their licenses as police officers. So they have a lot of authority, and the members of that entity are appointed, some by the legislature, some by the governor. It used to be all by the governor. And also in that legislation, they created their own inspector general for police misconduct, and so those are entities that the legislature has recently created that have an awful lot of authority to investigate a wide variety of complaints about citizens being mistreated by the police, for the most part, and so what I'm saying is, like, it can be done, right? And my advice is that I wouldn't want to hand the legislature an intricately detailed plan for establishing one of these things, like who appoints which members or anything like that, only because the legislature on its own is just going to, come to whatever compromise they need to come to accommodate all the concerns that are going to be brought to them. But I do think if we said, there should be an entity, it should be independent, it should have a lot of authority, it should have some financial resource, should have some staffing, and it should consist of persons with lived experience, persons with professional experience, and just say that, a lot of the General Assembly to figure out how the balance is going to work and exactly who appoints whom, because that's what they're going to do anyways, right? So I think it would be kind of a waste of time for us to try and do it for them, because 100% of the time they're going to come to whatever balance they need to come to. So that's my advice. And I think these things do have an impact over time. One thing I used to be involved with when I worked for Governor Malloy was the Criminal Justice Policy Oversight Commission, right? And didn't really have any direct power to change any policies, but it did have a lot of ability to put things in front of people, whether it's journalists or legislators or people working the system. And it did have an impact over time. It's like a lot of times people never have to deal with criticism or deal with problems just sweep this stuff under the rug. And I think any entity which is able to put stuff in a credible way in front of all the people that need to see it, that by itself can effect a huge change over time. And so that's just my general sense. And I just like the idea of establishing something that has real authority, that actually has some staffing.
I have to agree. The concept of a commission is one thing. The saying advisory, I'm not sure about that.
I wouldn't call
A
it
board of
advisory.
trustees or something like that with real vested power to actually bring in issues to the governors or to the public. You're absolutely right, the public.
I would just use the word oversight. It exists in all these other entities, the juvenile JJPOC, the Juvenile Justice Policy Oversight Commission. I mean, these entities do exist, and this is a little bit more focused.
And I think another thing is that this is a kind of a big juncture here for this process, to have our committee and to have the concern of the legislature about what is going on here. If we can move forward by capitalizing on this interest and saying, going forward, you need to put these things in place to assure this never happens to anybody else. But at the same time, I have worked for several governors myself, and I have found that sometimes some of them will be very generous with their support and funding, and sometimes they will not be. And so one of the more, just to give an example, in Rocky Hill, it was built in 1938. And it had no air conditioning in 2003. But it had a commission and a board of trustees, and it had all those reports. The most important thing is someone who cares. And once you bring this to the attention of the public and engage them, what Paul and what Nancy do is it needs to be multiplied, and it needs to become an important thing for people in the state of Connecticut to think about. They didn't think about these things. So we can describe what we want that oversight to be and who we want to be on it. And I agree, the idea of having, it is also up to the commissioner. I don't know if the commissioner ever knew this was going on at Whiting, but any commissioner with their salt would have been down there the next day. They would have. So you're right about the culture change, but the time is ripe. The time is right to give it a shot. Did you want to say something, Lori?
Yeah, actually, I think that Mike put that very eloquently and very succinctly. It all makes sense, kind of the way that he framed that, especially in light of these other oversight committees that exist in criminal justice. And I just wanted to also comment on the culture piece, kind of going back to that again, as a as the psychologist on this task force, I'm all about the data. And data is a powerful thing, and it can change cultures. It can change minds, and that's why I've been harping on this this piece, both mentioning it here at this task force, but also internally at the hospital. Let us see the data. Report these things. Let us know the camera reviews. There's a mindset, I think, when the cameras were being reviewed more frequently, that it was a way to get staff, a way to, the sort of eye in the sky, the way to get them, and that every day someone was going to be nabbed for doing something wrong. And there are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of data of these video reviews that reveal nothing. And I think that if staff could hear that and see that on an ongoing basis, that might start to shift the way they think about that. It's the same thing with the data on seclusion and restraint. If you told folks 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that you didn't have to restrain people on a daily basis, that there wouldn't be codes every day, multiple times a day, multiple units a day, they would not believe it. And nowadays we go weeks without episodes of seclusion and restraint. People have learned that we can manage without that. So things do change and cultures do change, and sometimes the data is key in making that happen. It does take time, but I do think that that's a key part of it.
Didn't it take CMS or DOJ or someone to come in to get us to look at that? So it took an outside force to kind of trigger that.
Yes, but what I'm saying is that the internally, then that data can change people's minds, that it's not necessary.
And just briefly on the reporting, I don't think it should go to one entity. I don't think it should go to just the governor or just public health. I think it should go to multiple. Like it should go to the full public health committee and the governor, so that they can affect change on this. Because I mean, I think the thing that we've always known but haven't said is our mental health and addiction responses are always political, and it depends on what the political thought is at that time, of how we handle things, whether it's, oh well, let's just put everyone in jail for drugs, or let's give them treatment. And it always comes down to a political decision. And it's at some point we got to start to look at, how is this affecting the actual people? And how can we do better as a society? And so I kind of like the idea of a governance board. I'm not wedded to it, but I'm kind of sitting there going, yeah, this would be great that if there was something that laid governance down to this. But I also think that this report should be going to the state board. Demas has a state board a state board meeting that has governor appointees and other people appointed to it. And it should be going to them too as well, so that there's enough agencies outside of CVH and Whiting, or outside of the state hospital system, that are having a look at this. So that would be my recommendation on that.
Well, frankly, it's a public document, so it can go anywhere. So are you talking about, I mean, because it's going to go to all these places. So is it more a question of not so much where it goes to, but who has authority to do something responsive to it? And that maybe what it really needs is, when it is filed, that the committee of cognizance, whoever that turns out to be, should conduct public hearings on that, so that the public knows what has changed and has not changed, and that the input can come not from just legislators or committees, but from the public, who have some kind of, whoever has a nexus to this. But we don't want a document that's just gets shelved. This is the report, but that there has to be a hearing, a public hearing.
I think that's very good. That's very good. I was thinking too, when I was the commissioner at Rocky Hill, no governors had been to see what it was like there. And the first time I took, it was actually Governor Rowan. He was stunned. He had no idea it was this way. He had been there many times for ceremonies, but he didn't see how the other half lived. And that in and of itself was really eye-opening to him. And it got a lot of support too. Then more, we invited the whole Veterans Affairs Committee down to say, look at this. This is what we've got here. And so they also saw that they shared the responsibility. And I think maybe that's what's something that we could try to affect as we move forward. We have the interests of public health, but how many of them have been there? And you know yourself that sometimes, as we talked about the facilities, that as we go forward with the concept of needing a new facility, they need to see what they have there, what we have now. and it does get people to thinking and supporting the changes that need to take place.
And can I just add, in terms of to whom reporting should be directed, as far as I'm concerned, as long as journalists and advocates can see it, it will take a life of its own from there. You know,
Right.
legislators and the governor are just overwhelmed with all kinds of stuff, you know, coming, you know, stacks and stacks of reports and recommendations. But I think it really needs to be in the hands of the people who are in a position to raise a level of awareness about it. And so I'm as long as it's a public document, I'm happy.
Is there anything, maybe I should ask folks to just jot down 3 or 4 points or what from this discussion of an oversight or a commission or what they want for the next meeting so that we can discuss it. What is your basic premise or what you'd like to see? And I think we've already come up with several of it. You know, the idea that it would be public, but not part of the mainstream of the facility. The advisory or whatever we call it, the commission or oversight, or what was the other word someone used? But the task force itself, it fills a square. It's called for in the statutes, and so we have it. But what does it do? And what maybe we should revisit that and say, what should that advisory committee do? But I don't. Advisory is such a, what do I want to say? It's an iffy kind of word. You know, you can take it or leave it. Maybe we need to think of something stronger.
I would go with oversight, and you know.
Yeah, I like oversight. Advisory sounds dismissive.
Yeah, like
Oversight.
take it or leave it.
Exactly. And it also lets people know that, you know, once this task force is done, that the oversight is not done.
Good point, Mike. And when you think about that, who should be on that committee? Just jot down, you know, who you think should be on that committee, because I think we've got something a good thing going here. So what would you like to see?
And not just who should be on the committee, but what are the term limits for a person to be on there? Because I think the current committee has people who've been on for like 20, 30 years. And, you know, at some point it just becomes.
So let me ask you this, Mike. Is there anything in statute right now about oversight committees? You talked about the.
I mean, there's a wide array. Some have teeth, some have no teeth, right? So, and you know, I think again, I'm 100% confident that our recommendations to the General Assembly regarding how many members, who should appoint them, what their term should be, would actually be ignored. Our recommendations about the types of people who should be represented on this would be taken seriously. So, I mean, the term limit thing, I got it, right? But I mean, probably those people have been on there forever because they don't really meet very often and they don't really do much. So it doesn't really matter. But I think
we should also say what their areas of responsibility will be. Their responsibility.
Yeah, exactly.
And we could get specific if we wanted to say they had to meet once a month or something like that. But I will also agree that I have been, I was on a board of trustees. That sounds a little better, but it didn't have a lot of action going for it. It was the people that came on the committee that were the action, that they were the ones that pushed the envelope so that it would be, it would be, provide some remedy to the situations. So, Any other comments? I'm wondering, Mike, you would be the one to tell us here. The statutes now have an advisory board for Whiting Forensic Hospital in statutes. Would we want to keep the advisory board or put in something entirely different?
My sense is
Just look at
scrap
it.
it and start from scratch. You know, you've got the precedent that there's some sort of board that in theory at least has some authority.
Because
I would just
but
scrap
this is
it.
interesting. I've got it here. I've got it here from Dr. Hauser. And bullet number 5, talking about what they, the training needs, staffing vacancies, plans to rectify. All of that, if they had the firepower, as we like to say in the military, they had the firepower to make this happen. But they were not really being used or given the power. They were not empowered to make these changes. So I agree with you. We have to craft something that's going to be up to the task of both the patients, the families, the public, and the professionals that work there.
And to me, I would be clear that this entity should be able to investigate complaints and concerns, right? And I think that there should be, whether you call it an inspector general or not, someone who's a staff person who has the authority to actually do this work and come back with a report that is received by the oversight commission, and then they can decide how they want to deal with it. And like I said, this like the city of Hartford has just created a civilian review board for its police. And,
Right.
they're going to hire an inspector general to staff it. The inspector general will report to the civilian review board. The review board will make recommendations of what they think should happen as a result. If it turns out that their recommendation is contrary to what the chief of police wants to do, then there's some sort of mediation process. I mean, there's all kinds of models out there to give it real teeth. And like I say, these are being developed in all different areas at the moment. So,
but I think we have to be careful because I'm sure Mike, that but attorneys who represent people who file complaints against the police do not put a lot of weight behind civilian review boards, that they're stacked by the police, and that they're not very credible.
I
And
think you're talking about not the civilian review boards, but the police commissions. And all I can tell you, I know a little bit about, this is completely new in Hartford, the way they've organized.
Yeah, I saw it in the paper. Yeah.
But it's got a lot of teeth, and it's the people on it are in some cases actually community people who are nominated by community organization. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to do it, to have it really independent and really have a lot of authority. They have subpoena powers, et cetera. So there's a lot of models out there. I'm just saying, like, you can make one of these things very effective if you choose to. And
well, that
my
gets,
recommendation. Go ahead.
right, that gets right to what I said about why I don't think this kind of a oversight committee should be appointed by the governor or the legislature, because then it's not going to have buy-in. You can put something in that the Disability Rights Connecticut shall appoint a person, that Advocacy Unlimited shall appoint a person, that the client, I forgot what they call the client groups at the hospital, but they can appoint a person. So if you get them appointed by people who are the stakeholders, and not by the people who represent the management and who represent those who really hold the sticks, then it has some credibility. But otherwise, I think it's just replicating something with maybe a little bit more window dressing. It's gotta come from the community kind of focus.
Well, when you're crafting your ideal oversight committee, that's a very good, important thing to do, because I mean, an important part to put in there. You're absolutely right, because if you can be prescriptive in what you say, who should be on the board. I would just say that I had legislation that said that I should have a member of the Spanish-American War veterans on the committee. Well, they don't exist anymore, so we had to go for a legislative change. So the point being is, as we do this, think of the narrowing it down to what you'd like to see. But if some of these organizations go out of business, then maybe they wouldn't be eligible for membership on the oversight committee. It was pretty funny.
Yep. My only comment to that is that, it's the General Assembly and the governor who together will write this statute. And
Right, but we can make
it would be a
suggestions.
first, it would be a first if they abdicated their responsibility to pick the actual people. So, I mean, you can recommend
Well,
it.
in fact, think about this. Think about our group. That was, one would point this, one would put, they look, but they also, didn't they say one had to be something? You had to be this or that or the other thing,
Yeah.
but these could be appointed. And so we came from different places. I would not want to get down in the weeds on the language, but I would want to say in a general way that you would want to be sure, just as you said, Nancy, just how you said it, that the organizations or people who are actually doing the work should be part of this. And it could, I'm sure you can write it up so it'll fly. Any thoughts, Sean?
No, I'm just honestly, I'm just taking what everybody is saying, and I've jotted down notes, and I feel as though I've learned a lot from the entire group, the entire time being on this, and just really observing today.
So let me ask you this, Sean, do you have any like oversight boards for your operation? Or advisory,
If it was privately owned, you would have an advisory group, but being in different states, it's different in each state, and everybody has their different regulations. And gathering from all the different states that we're in, Nancy's idea of having the stakeholders create a board or advisory council, whatever you want to call it, ends up with a board that is the best fit board, because nobody necessarily knows each other, and there isn't one person or one group picking the entire board so that they can get what they want to do with the actual group or facility. So it really matters in every state. We don't have, in every state, they're very strict about oversight in nursing homes and assisted livings. I think being part of this group, I was more shocked and then when touring the facilities, of the condition of the facility, and us putting forward, that the facility needs to be updated with a new facility. There's no, and Dr. Rodas can agree, there's no way a hospital serving the general public would be in that type of condition. I just, it's a duty of all of us and citizens that anybody with a mental health issue deserves to have the same environment as the rest of us would. So really just the past few meetings, just kind of observing and taking it all in.
but I think you probably see the difference in the investment in the infrastructure or the structure. And even though it does have a profound effect on people. Wouldn't you agree, Dr. Rodas? how the place looks, people that work there, how they feel. Were you wanting to say something, Dr. Rodas?
No, I just was thumbs up agreeing. I think, you know, I want to be careful because I don't want, and I think Laura tried to, or someone made this point last time we spoke, we shouldn't fool ourselves that the facility alone will either change the culture or the process or the care. That being said, I totally agree that it's very, very, very important to have a nurturing, caring, safe environment, and safety and caring can actually be built in to the facility. But to change the culture takes management and, to Laura's point, data, and people really do respond to positive information. I think it's not should be all negative. You know, it's like, oh, we had an incident. Well, we had 4,000 hours of videotape where no event occurred. We had one incident and then we investigated, and that's what we found. And so I think taking the culture needs management and governance, but I think the facilities can certainly go a long way to improve morale of both staff, to your point, of staff and patients. And there's plenty of data to support that, but it's not a proxy for providing good care or providing safe care, or providing quality care. It's not. It's neither. It's not. It's not. It's a. While I'm not sure it's necessary nor sufficient, but it certainly helps. I hope that helps.
Are there any other comments? I see none. So just keep in mind that kind of like your do out is synthesize in some format, bullets or however, what your personal concept of how we'd like to see this at the end of the rainbow. This is the kind of environment we'd like to see. This is the kind of overriding mission and how to accomplish it. And also, we want to work on what is this oversight committee going to look like? And I think we've heard some really good things. And I hope that people will write that up so we can put that into how we see it. We're not going to tell the legislature how to write this, but we can certainly set forth the best thinking of this group as to what should actually happen. Beverly, are you here?
Yes, I am, Linda.
So we still have time to just, is there any other business to come up right now before we move on? Because we want to set the meetings. Beverly and some of the staff are going to be jumping into the session tomorrow. And so she's going to have to divide her time. We wanted to ask about setting a date for the next meeting. And wondering if, how often I think the business of the task force is not as critical right now as we kind of perfect this, but do folks want to continue meeting every other week?
Well, Tuesday afternoons are about to become impossible for me.
Okay. What's looking good for you?
Anything but Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, I can work
Okay.
around.
Let's remember that there's a whole bunch of stuff on this that, you know, we haven't touched. As I started to talk about earlier, we still have to talk about the PSRB. Unless Lori's willing to withdraw her objection, we could just check that off as that we all agree.
Well, I don't know. We have some
So
minutes
I don't
here.
think so. So she's
If everybody wants to, but let's set the time. So Tuesday afternoons are out for Paul. What about instead of every other week, every third week? Does that work? No.
we got to get this going. I mean, we can't.
Well, we
slow
have all the way to March before we really have to wrap this up.
Well,
Because
don't
we're-
we have by statute, do we actually have the authority? Beverly, do we have the authority to keep meeting by statute?
I don't know.
Well, that's a good question. We could ask is David still on?
David would not have that.
But
that-
could he find out?
I can find out for you because I can ask the attorney the question.
Otherwise,
And
just start writing.
based on my experience, there have been plenty of task forces that have reported well after their statutory deadline. So I suppose, I mean, we could meet whether or not because I'm not sure we actually have any authority, right? All we could do is give recommendations to the General Assembly, and whether or not they even read them is up to them. So I don't know that we don't have authority to meet. I think we had a deadline, and we have the obvious explanation that COVID interrupted our work together with everyone else's work. We have sort of a informal agreement with at least one of the two co-chairs of the Public Health Committee that we would get them something streamlined right about now, and then we would do something more complete later in the legislative session. So, but what I was going to suggest, and Linda, you had said earlier that you had attempted several times to reach out to Senator Abrams. Perhaps Beverly could communicate with both chairs and ranking members of the newly constituted Public Health Committee and ask them if they would like to speak to us because I would be really interested in having the opportunity to just have a dialogue with them in the context of one of these meetings.
Well, you brought up the point, and what I actually thought I would take forward to tell them some of the things that I think we have consensus on is the concept of the facilities master plan and what that would entail. We also talked about, I'm not going to talk about training, and I'll tell you why. I'm going to say education, because someone made the comment, you train dogs, you don't train people, you educate people. So could we use that? It just, because you used to say with nurses training, okay? But we were really being educated. We weren't being trained.
I just ask, I do think there are definitely several areas which we have consensus, and we're starting to kind of put this into its final form and it's taking shape and whatnot, but should we get all of that solidified before we speak to the Public Health Committee? Or I feel like we're kind of like, yeah, we have some recommendations, we sort of have this consensus, but
you know, that
but
we've
like,
talked about this several times, and let us be honest, it's really up to us. I had said that I had hoped that we would have something for her to look at, but maybe she's not interested in that right now. I don't know. But I do think my note to her said how we've been working every other week and trying to get this done because of the COVID quarantine, and that we were working on this, and that we had been able to arrange for the survey, and that the final report would not be ready until we had that and had time to synthesize the information that comes from that survey. Other than that, I didn't say anything else. But I didn't.
I mean,
send
I'm
it to her.
thinking that
I
perhaps
didn't send it to her because it keeps bouncing back.
I think we have a couple other broad areas to discuss, the patient searches, the PSRB, and then some element of community, how we want to kind of frame that. So I'm just wondering if maybe we meet another session or two before having a discussion with them, just so we're solidified on those overarching things.
That sounds like a plan.
Linda, when you get a moment, I sent you the email for both Jonathan Steiner
Okay,
and
so
Senator
that's what I'll
Abrams.
say, that we discussed it today and we're not quite ready to fire it up. I agree with you. But I did say, if you really wanted to know what was happening, you could watch us on CTN.
Of course. Mike, do you have a teaching
Words of
schedule to
wisdom?
work around this semester?
Yeah, my teaching is Mondays and Wednesdays, and it's from like, I think it's 11 in the morning. I have 3 classes on each of those days until, like 7 o'clock at night. So that's kind of, Monday and Wednesday afternoons are just bad for me.
Could we do, Paul, are you available like Tuesday if we do it earlier in the day, if we do it in the morning?
Yeah, I mean, I'm booked solid 11 to 5 teaching on Tuesdays and
Okay.
Thursdays. So
All right, well, what about Thursdays?
the same 11 to 5 on Thursdays.
All right, so you're Tuesday and Thursdays.
Could we do 9 to 11 or does that back you up too much?
That is a lot of time to be sitting on a Zoom meeting. By the time 5 o'clock comes around, I might be needing services at Whiting.
Is Dr. Rodas? I'm not seeing everybody. Let me see here. Dr. Rodas, do you have
Yeah.
any limitations as far as time?
I have some already preset. I don't have anything set now, so I can't tell you that I have any particular good or bad time, but I'm certainly far more flexible than I ever was in my past. So, Wednesdays typically are a little better. Mornings are usually challenging before 10 just because of the home dynamics, but I'll be as flexible as I can be.
What if we went back to Friday? Beverly, are you still with us?
I am.
Okay, what will you have? Beverly's operating solo here for us. And I just wondered, was there any day that's better than others for you as the session starts?
Because since we're doing everything virtual, select your date and I'll have someone stop it if I cannot be there.
Okay, all right, so that's not a consider.
It's no longer because of a room restriction access.
Yeah.
We're doing everything virtual, so I should be able to have the committee staff. If it's every other 2 week or every 3 weeks, that's fine.
If we do Friday, I have a call at noon every other Friday, but if we scheduled it at 1, there would be any conflict. It's always
Fridays work for
by
me.
1.
How does
That-
Fridays
that-
go with everybody?
Fridays
work?
at 1 work for me.
Say
Perfect.
again?
Fridays at 1 work for me.
Good. How about you, Dr. Rodas?
Fine.
I'm looking at consensus. How about you, Sean?
Friday at 1 works great.
And Mike, how's that ride with
Good.
you? All right, so Fridays at 1.
Woo! That wasn't as hard as it could have been.
Someone want to make a motion?
Well,
Which Friday? When are we starting? So I'm clear.
Do-
Which is the first
Yeah,
Friday? So every
do-
2
do-
weeks or every
do-
3 weeks?
still have to hear from Kim.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, all right. Um,
Do we want to start with the 15th?
Works for me.
Yep.
And what did we agree? We'll stick with the every 2 week cadence.
yeah,
I
it
I
works
would
for
recommend
me,
that, but
especially on Friday at 1.
And that's good because that's the alternate Friday that I don't have that call.
perfect.
So
Okay.
There you go.
And so the do outs about what we'd like to see at the end and some items for an oversight group, oversight committee or commission, anything. This commission's a tougher word than committee though, isn't it?
Right.
Powerful. All right, so it's an oversight commission. I like that idea. And my, if I am able, well, when I am able to get, convey anything to the chairman, Senator Abrams, I will tell her that we will be meeting every other week. But we do not think that we are reticent. We are reluctant to say anything until we hear and see the surveys and we have concluded our deliberations. How's that sound?
Sounds fine. Although, can I just say, number one, as a former member of the House of Representatives, every committee has 2 co-chairs. and
Yes, I
2
know. We're gonna do, is it co-chairs or am I still stuck in the Senate where
Co-chairs.
it's a ranking member and a chair?
So in this case, the committee has 1 House chair and 1 Senate chair. They're both co-chairs of the committee. In addition to that, whichever party is in the minority has a ranking member. So in other words, under the current circumstances, the 2 ranking members are the 2 head Republicans and the 2 co-chairs are the 2 head Democrats, basically.
Okay.
And
So we
they're
should
the
do
leaders
all
of the
4?
committee. Yeah, I would.
Okay,
I would.
okay, all 4. I have a salient question to ask is, do you think there's anybody else we want to hear from before, as we move through the spring?
I think we've got to just move forward and get the report out. I think that if we keep adding stuff, it'll never get done. We still have a whole lot here.
Okay, we also have the Office of Legislative Research digging out some stuff for us.
Linda, just to remind you, you said you were going to share that document you have.
I am.
With all of us. So
I
please,
am.
just to remind you, we look forward to reading it, I'm sure.
We have an idea of when the OLR might have stuff for us?
Well,
Working on issue stuff for this session. So I believe sometime after session starts.
Oh, okay.
Because we
So,
sent it to them just before, like a couple of weeks before session starts. So they did have like a lot of stuff they were putting together for the start of session.
And can I just add that maybe I'm just stating the obvious, but in terms of input from anybody that we haven't already gotten input from, once we make our report, the General Assembly has the option of either having that part of a bill or not. And if they do, there will be public hearings and there'll be plenty of input from all kinds of points of view before anything is finalized by the General Assembly. So I'm just, because I'm sure there are people that we would have liked to have heard from that we haven't heard from, or who would have liked to have had some input that haven't to date, but they will always have an opportunity to do that prior to anything becoming
Right, I
formalized.
agree. So is there anything else to come before us today?
We're good.
Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn with my
So moved.
thanks to you all. We've got a motion and a second. Does anybody want to stay? We'll see you now.
Hold it. Did
Aye.
Sean raise his hand? To
No.
stay?
I made the motions.
Anybody who wants to stay, you
No,
can stay. As we like to say, out here.